to stare at the moon. Boom boom, 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 crack. It seemed to have been almost 2 hours when I first heard that sound. It was loud, and therefore it was close. It seemed to have come from about 10 feet away, through the right-hand wall of the tent. I did not keep my eyes off the moon. Boom boom, boom boom, crack. I was first confused. The confusion then quickly turned to terror. It had come from beyond the left-hand wall this time, now closer than the previous sound. Whatever this thing was, it was moving fast. Unnaturally fast, in fact, at least for any larger animal up here in the northeast. I did not keep my eyes off the moon. As far as I was concerned, its light was my only real sense of protection. My glorified butter knife be damned. Yet all I wanted was for it to become sunlight. All I wanted was for this night to be over. Boom boom, boom boom, crack. It came through the front door that time. The door didn't move or rip. Boom boom, boom boom, crack. Again, it came through the front door. Silence. Then, after about a minute, the growling started back up. It was easier to hear now, being that the beast was so close, and it was truly one of the most, if not the most, strange and horrifying sound I had ever heard. What it sounded like, at least to me, was a human gargling water, yet deep in pitch, and blended in with it was something of a low-pitched humming noise. I continued to gaze intently at the half-formed orb in the sky. My whole body tensed up. I gripped the handle of the dagger even tighter, though it almost slipped from my hands due to the profuse amount of sweat. I had to cover my mouth with my hand, what with how heavy I was now breathing. I felt my veins run cold as I heard another branch crack to my left, but I did not take my eyes off the moon. Another growl rang through the night. It sounded angry. It was as though it were an animal standing its ground, asserting its dominance. My heart skipped a beat upon realizing this. I began to tremble, as though shivering from a chill in the air. I again almost dropped the knife when I heard the right-hand wall itself almost seem to growl at me. My nervous system kicked in, and for the first time in hours, the moon left my sight. My eyes, my head darted over to the right-hand wall and remained focused solely upon it. For about 2 minutes or more I stared at it, almost in a trance as I waited for the next crack or growl to resonate from somewhere, anywhere. Silence. For an uncomfortable amount of time, there was nothing but silence. My heartbeat, once again, was all that I could hear. It did not cease its incessant pounding. Boom boom, boom boom. There was no crack of a branch. Boom boom, boom boom. No growl rang through the night. Boom boom, boom boom. I turned my head back to the roof and resumed staring into the pale, rounded light. I was so tired now. My eyelids began to fall. The moon was going dark. No, not now. I couldn't fall asleep now. It was still out there. It had to be. I opened my eyes again. Everything still seemed dark. I took a deep breath and shook my head violently, fighting back the urge to fall unconscious. For a moment, I was somewhat calm. Enough so that it seemed my heartbeat was beginning to slow. Boom boom, boom boom. I resumed being as I was before, staring into the darkness above. Darkness. My heartbeat quickened up again, almost faster than ever. Boom boom, boom boom, boom boom. The moon was gone. The waning gibbous. My only real sense of protection. My nightlight. Gone. The knife finally fell from my hand as I again began to tremble. It rolled down my stomach and, upon hitting the tent floor, made a metallic thud against a rock somewhere beneath the canvas surface. In almost the same moment this happened, the dark itself seemed to move. As it did, a glow began to quickly form around it. A glow so familiar that it could only be one thing: moonlight. The creature, the beast, whatever it was standing over the tent, staring down at me on my sleeping bag. The light of the moon and the stars outlined its ungodly figure. A humanoid creature, it appeared to be, yet its head was almost too perfectly curved. It was almost like a sculpted head, one with no ears or even any hair. Its skin seemed to be a bit rough in texture, but the color of it was undiscernible. The most disturbing part of it all, though, was the shape of its body. While its head was somewhat skinny, its body was bloated and completely malformed. Its right arm was so much bigger and distorted than its left arm, as though it had been injected with some kind of super steroid. Beyond this, the facial features were completely unseen, all there to behold being its gargantuan shadow. Then, very slowly, it raised up its much skinnier arm and began running its hand down the netting of the tent. Doing so revealed its horribly twisted hand, its disturbingly long fingers making something of a scratching sound as they slowly cut through the thin, thread-like netting. I wept. I wept hard. The tears streamed down in droves. I began to hyperventilate. It grew worse and worse as the netting fell more and more in two from the creature's claws. I was no longer a scout, no longer a man of courage who had spent the past 12 or more hours on the camping trip of a lifetime, no longer one who could see the civility in an unpredictable, hostile environment. Now, I was nothing more than a child that lay weak and cowardly in his darkened bedroom, shrinking away from the boogeyman that lurked in the shadows, lurked inside nothing more than old tales that ran through their head. Only now, the old tales were real. The boogeyman was real. There was no method of escape to be found here. I was trapped in what was inevitably my final resting place. My tent, I now must say, is comparable to that of a coffin. Above me stood my undertaker, already dead. I was already dead, and yet I found myself grabbing for the knife. I held the cold blade up to the beast and shut my eyes tightly. Even in the darkness, I could still sense its movement. Its gargantuan figure was reaching down to me. Hey! The call came from what seemed to be the back wall. Following it was the sound of movement. What sounded like 2 or 3 things rushing in my direction. The creature snarled in response, but that snarl then quickly morphed into a shrill wail, one that echoed for what seemed like miles into the night. For a moment, I half opened my eyes as it screamed, seemingly in pain. In the blurriness of the scene, I saw very little. I did not see an attacker, or even hear some sort of struggle between 2 entities. Rather, I saw the creature, the boogeyman, in full display, shining in a beam of light for but the briefest of seconds. Hey! Go! Get out of here! In those few moments before it had taken off, I could remember only 2 things about it. The pink of its skin, and the pale white of its eyes. The wailing echoed farther and farther away into the distance as I once again made eye contact with the moon. Its pale light was quickly overpowered, though, by many far brighter lights, the lights that truly protected me. I shut my eyes to them and saw nothing else. When I awoke, the scene had changed. Above me was a pale light, yes, but it wasn't the moon, or even heaven for that matter. It was a lamp. I sat up and found that I was inside now. The walls were painted white, and I saw, hanging on one of them, a picture of a pink-skinned humanoid, a diagram of human muscles. I was laying in a bed at the hospital. The nurse, sitting at my bedside, looked up at me and spoke. "Oh, good, you're finally awake. Wait here for a moment, I'll get the doctor." The doctor came in some 2 minutes later. My parents followed swiftly. He explained what had happened. "Everything's all right, okay? Nothing serious happened. You simply were in shock." "Shock?" I said, slightly confused. "Yes, shock," he answered. "You're truly a lucky kid, though. What, almost getting killed by that thing? Your father and the others got there just in time. Scared it away with all their shouting and their flashlights. What did you say it was again? A black bear, right?" My dad nodded. I was flabbergasted. I was completely beside myself. A black bear. A damn black bear of all things. My dad had to have gotten a good look at it. He had to have seen its colors of pink and white. Its absolutely grotesque figure. But I looked hard at my dad, frowning. But the face he gave in response was enough to mellow me down. The look one gives as if to say, "Don't." I guess you're right. Luckiest child in the world. I faked a smile at the doctor. He smiled back as he told my parents to follow him out of the room. As they left, my dad looked back at me, smiling slightly, and nodded. I nodded back. He is right, you know. There are very few who would believe it. I'm sure that even you, listening to this, have your doubts. Now, if you were to ask me what it was that I encountered in the woods that night, I still don't have an answer. I'm still madly searching for one to this day. Hell, I've even considered going back to that trail with a loaded firearm this time around. But even then, I don't think I would find anything. That's probably how it will remain. I mean, no one's ever captured Bigfoot, right? No cop has ever arrested and booked a hooligan for butchering a young couple with his hooked appendage. No real records out there of somebody having been slaughtered by a woman in their mirror. No parent has ever claimed, with dignity, to have seen the boogeyman hiding beneath their child's bed. Thus, my story is nothing more than a simple campfire tale. It is just as much a joke as the story of the Viper. With that said, I ask of you these simple requests. If you too are a Boy Scout, or even just a simple lover of nature, think twice about what shadows are cast among the trees. Think long and hard about those stories that you hear around the campfire. Most important, above all though, if you plan to spend the night amongst those blackened, twisted shapes, having nothing but the moonlight to stand at your side, remember these two simple words. Be prepared. For context, I attend a community college in Northern California. It's an overall great college, but the downside to this campus is the location. The layout of this building in particular has 4 floors total, and also has stairs that point directly to the street and to the other parts of the campus. Let's just say crimes are the norm here. We have your average creeps too. Since I work 40 hours a week, I end up taking night classes because of how well they fit my work schedule. Recently at our campus, we had a homeless man expose himself to one of our classmates after class. Evidently was caught due to the security footage, and obviously that wasn't a smart move. We also had another unrelated incident where a man was hanging around the women's restroom and was caught as well. Since this specific incident has occurred, I've been checking my email for updates on this recent incident that happened on our campus, with no luck. As I was exiting out of my chemistry class, feeling dazed after taking our 3rd exam of this semester, I called my boyfriend because we planned after class to get groceries. I usually take the stairs that are directly near the street because it's a quicker way to get to the parking lot. My boyfriend mentions that we should meet up at Walmart, and I agreed. As I was going to hang up the phone, I noticed a lone man on the 1st floor with his bike just standing there. I did a double take to see if he was waiting for anyone in particular, but was just standing there with no expression. My boyfriend mentioned that he'll be at the store in 10 minutes, and suddenly, I hear the man laughing maniacally. It had a strange resemblance to the Joker, and thoroughly sent chills down my spine. Stay on the line, please, don't hang up. There's a man on the 1st floor laughing at what seems to be nothing. He's just standing there. Alright, no problem, my boyfriend says. I head across the building to head to the other stair exit, and as I'm doing so, I can still hear the man laughing. My boyfriend told me that it would be wise to find another classmate or a student so that I wouldn't be alone, but due to having an afternoon class, most students have returned home. As I'm heading downstairs and at the corner of my eye, I can see the man is now heading in my direction, so I bolted back up. I ducked into a classroom, and very shortly after, I saw the man go by very fast. I never saw the man on campus again. I have no idea if he was insane or just trying to scare me, but I can still hear the man's mortifying laugh. I'm a hunter here in Minnesota, in a town not far north of Mille Lacs Lake. I have a handful of stories detailing freaky incidents that have taken place on hunts. Here is the first. One season in particular, I was fairly deep in the woods on a snowmobile trail. When I hunt, I typically carry my knife and pack. I feel fairly confident in these woods, but this season I had some concern. The deer population seemed lower on our property recently, and we knew that there were wolves around, because you would find their tracks, not to mention being able to hear them howl at night. But luckily, they typically don't mess with people. But as I was scanning for deer tracks in the dirt, I found a different set of tracks that stood out to me. They looked canine, minus the nail marks, and was a bit wider. The paw on it looked like a 150-pound animal. Then it clicked that this was a feline track. A big one, and fairly fresh. I knew that there were bobcats around, but they don't get that big, so the next logical step is to assume that there was a cougar in the area. I decided to double back, so I'm heading back east on the trail when my dad calls and asks me to do a push through the woods towards his stand. So I say sure. At this point, his stand is maybe 500 meters through thick woods from me, and I'm concerned about the large predator nearby. But I also know that I'm 6'4" and about 190 pounds before putting on my gear. Statistically speaking, cougars don't tend to attack, healthy adult men. So I push forward. I get about halfway to the other stand when I get concerned because I lost my marker. I stop to regain my bearings, and then it hits me. Something in my gut tells me, you are being watched. Then I notice how still the woods are, deathly quiet. Then I hear a branch snap behind me, maybe 20 meters. I ready my rifle and scan in a circle, but only see trees and brush. I wait, and it's just way too quiet. So I push forward towards my dad's stand, the whole time hearing something not far behind me that's quietly keeping pace. Eventually I stop hearing it, and the woods went back to normal with the birds singing and whatnot. Then I stepped out onto the trail about 40 meters from my dad's stand. I suspect it was the cougar that made the tracks. My guess is that it thought that I would pick up too much of a fight, or it caught my dad's scent and chose to back off. I never did see it, but something definitely was following me. Story number 2. This happened like 2 years ago now. I decided to take my fiance hiking after work one evening in a park with some nice bluffs to climb for a great view. If I'm honest, I was hoping to see a nice sunset and earn some boyfriend points so I could drink with my buddies on the weekend without complaint. You should know that this isn't a particularly safe thing to do at this time of night, so I gave her my tactical knife, and I carried a .40 caliber pistol. We arrive and park the car before heading up the trail. Then, about 100 meters in, we spook what I assumed was a deer, which hauled ass away from us so quickly that I only saw a flash of tan. Honestly, it scared us pretty good, too. So I'm on edge, and we round a crest in a hill, and I see a black mass to my left in my peripheral vision. I unsnap the retention on my holster and turn to engage what turned out to be nothing but a mound of black dirt. So I calm down, and we continue on with our nice little evening hike, with birds chirping, bugs making noise, regular forest stuff. Now for the creepy part. Once we're within about 200 meters of the halfway point on the trail, it starts to feel real eerie, almost like we are being watched. This time it clicked right away. The woods are now dead, but I start noticing movement keeping pace with us, so I keep us moving towards the top of the hill, the high ground which is the halfway point on the trail. We reach it and stop, and so does whatever was following us. But the woods are still dead calm, and my fiance tells me she thinks we are being followed. So we decide to move on and take a shortcut back down to the bluff, to the paved trail. We make it, and the woods get back to normal sounds again. We considered hiking more, but were a bit too spooked and left the park. Now whatever was following us I suspect was another cougar. It was quiet, and we didn't see it, and the strangest part is that the stalking noises it did make sounded elevated, like it was moving from tree to tree, and big cats have been known to do this. Story number 3, perhaps the least explainable of the 3. This one happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old, and much more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwest Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer and knew the woods well, but at night, it was wise to stay in the cabin, or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of the bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not creepy. That is, until this incident. This happened in broad daylight, sometime around noon. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo. He was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters up the trail. We had enough at this point, and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail, talking, and he was maybe 10 feet away from me. When I decided to mess with him, I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze, and then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right. When I saw it, its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear. At least 300 pounds. But it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs crouching next to the tree, with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. The next thing I know, we're both sprinting back towards our cabin. I look back at the wolf or bear or whatever the hell it was, which was now in the process of full-on charging us, barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason, it stopped following us as we broke out of the tree line. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. The wolf thing had to be nearly 7 feet tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws, it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know, they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on their hind legs. I still have no idea to this day exactly what that thing was. I used to work at a summer camp in Ontario. While I was technically a camp counselor, I had the added responsibility of performing a lot of the maintenance tasks around the property. This was nice because I could still join in on camp activities if I wanted to. Or if the kids were acting up, I could just leave it to everyone else to deal with and go cut grass or hide out in the workshop tinkering with stuff for a bit. I probably had the best job there, to be honest. The camp was located on the shoreline of a massive lake. There were 2 rows of cabins, with a path between them leading down to the water, where our dock jutted out into the lake. This is where we kept all our small sailboats. Our rescue boat, which was a Boston whaler, and a couple of sea-doos. Behind where the cabins were was mostly forest except for the 5-kilometer trail that led back out to the main road with a few cottages on it. A little ways up this trail, there was a clearing where the staff all kept their cars, and where the buses would park. There was also a large barn that we used as a workshop to build picnic tables and other things the camp might need. We also kept our 2 ATVs, a John Deere Gator, and a Kubota L-Series tractor with a few attachments in here. These were mostly used to move things around the camp and for various maintenance jobs. Changeover was probably the best time to be there. It was when the previous group of kids had all left, but the next group hadn't arrived yet, so we pretty much had the whole place to ourselves for the weekend. We would usually bust our asses all day Saturday to get all the actual work out of the way, so that we could spend the night partying and just sleep most of Sunday. There's one changeover weekend, though, that none of us will ever forget. It started out normally. All the kids loaded onto the buses, the cabins were checked and cleaned, while I took the Gator and a trailer into the woods to collect more firewood, just like we had done hundreds of times before. When I returned from my expedition, I grabbed an axe from the barn and began splitting the logs I had cut up with a chainsaw when one of the other staff members came on the radio. "Hey, did anyone else hear that noise out in the lake?" she asked. I admitted that I hadn't, but judging by the responses of the rest of the staff, they had all heard it. I figured it was just a moose calling across the lake, and I didn't hear it because the barn was further back, than all of the other buildings. I continued chopping and stacking firewood in the back of the barn, and after I was done, I took my toolbox and got on one of the ATVs and drove down to the cabins. By this point, the other staff had finished cleaning, and all I really had to do was make a few minor repairs, and we would be done for the night. At dinner that night, all anyone could talk about was the mysterious noise out in the lake. They described it as sounding like a very distorted elephant call. We all sort of laughed it off though, as the alcohol was starting to take effect, and no one really took it seriously. As the only sober one left, it was my responsibility to start the fire that night. I brought the gator down with a load of wood in the dump box and began to light the fire, while everyone else cleaned up from dinner inside. Slowly, the other staff finished up and began to trickle out to join me at the fire pit. It was a full moon, and the fire pit was right next to the lake, so you could see all the way across. The lake almost seemed to glow in the moonlight, and the twinkle of the lights from the cottages on the other side made the whole scene quite magical. Everyone sat around the fire drinking and laughing, telling stories of who their favorite kid was, or which kid they hated the most. Basically talking about exactly what you would expect camp counselors to talk about when not on duty. Later that night, one of the girls brought out her guitar and sang for us while the impromptu couples of the night cuddled around the fire. I, of course, always seemed to be left out of the hookup culture around the camp. Maybe it was because of my role that they saw me as more of a senior staff member. I don't know. Either way, none of the girls ever wanted to hook up with me. As a result of not being otherwise engaged in romance, as the music played, I gazed out across the lake. I could see the navigation lights of a small boat coming towards us from across the lake, and as it drew closer I could hear the engines and it sounded like it was going at full throttle. I ignored it for a while, since it was possible to drive into town by boat through here, so seeing a boat late at night wasn't out of the ordinary. What was out of the ordinary was when the boat got closer to shore and didn't seem to show any signs of slowing down. I pointed this out to one of the guys sitting next to me, and he stood up to look. A few others joined him, and even the girl playing guitar stopped and turned around. With the music stopped, we could all hear the boat engine running at full RPM as it headed for shore. There was a loud crack as the boat hit the dock of a neighboring cottage, which deflected it back towards us, where it missed the beach entirely and ran up onto the rocks a little ways down the shore and out of sight from us. The engines sounded awful as they were now out of the water and sucking air, but they didn't turn off or even idle down. Because of this, I immediately assumed the driver had to be unconscious, and I grabbed a first aid kit out of the main cabin as well as the keys for the Boston whaler and ran down to our dock. A few of the other staff who were relatively sober came with me as we cast off and drove a little ways down to the shoreline to the runaway boat. When we got there, one of the other staff jumped on board and immediately shut the engine down. Using the searchlight on our boat, we could now get a good look at this mystery boat. It was an older Sea Ray bowrider, and it looked pretty thrashed. The windshield on the driver's side had been smashed, and the back of the driver's seat had been ripped off and was laying on the floor near the back of the boat. There also seemed to be blood splatters toward the rear of the boat and over the top of the engine compartment. The most disturbing part, though, was that no one was on board. From the evidence that we had seen, it appeared as though the driver had been ripped out of the boat by something while driving at full speed. We called 911, and when the police arrived, they determined that the boat should still float, and we helped them to tow it over to our dock, where they could get a better look at it. They figured some cottager had been driving recklessly out on the lake, and had been thrown from the boat, and we all agreed that that seemed like the most logical explanation. A search was put out for a missing person on the lake that night, and within an hour, a helicopter was hovering over the lake, scanning it with a searchlight. The next day, the police were able to track down the owner of the boat who came to inspect it. Him and his whole family were accounted for, so none of them had been the person driving the boat the previous night. Someone had stolen this poor man's boat and had been ripped out of it while trying to get away. That's when I remembered the distorted elephant noise the other staff had been talking about. The damage to the boat did look an awful lot like some large creature had taken a swipe at the boat and ripped the driver right out. I of course kept my thoughts to myself as I didn't want to look stupid, but later that night, after the police had the boat hauled away, another one of the staff mentioned the same theory, that whatever had made that noise had attacked that stolen boat and killed the driver. Or maybe the driver was trying to get away from the creature and had stolen the boat as a means of escape. We all talked about the incident for weeks after that, speculating on what happened. Given the circumstances and local legends, our running theory is that some unfortunate soul ran across a Wendigo in the woods, and in their attempt to escape, had found this boat with the keys in it, but was ripped from the boat as they were taking off from the dock, leaving the boat to continue on with no driver as the person was devoured. Of course, something else more realistic could have happened. Disturbs me to this day. Winter is long and cold up here, but fun nonetheless. As a child, I would stay outside all day playing in the snow, and then have to soak my hands in warm water for 10 minutes, just to get the feeling back in them. Those were the best times of my life. However, the winter I was in 5th grade, something horrible would be set in motion in my town. School had just let out for Christmas break when the first body was found. His name was Mike Keller, and he was a 2nd grader from Mount Vernon. The reports on the news said he had been beaten severely, but he also had multiple stab wounds that were determined to be the cause of death. I can't say that the murder caused an uproar. That would come later, but it certainly got folks' attention. It didn't put a dent in my thick head. If my mom mentioned it to me, I don't recall it. My usual life continued unabated. Day after day, I would spend my time playing in the snow, only taking breaks to eat and play Minecraft. Things didn't really ramp up until another kid was found. This one turned out to be from my neck of the woods. The police reports echoed that of the previous murder, although the stab wounds were far more numerous than on the body of Keller. Now was when the parents, county-wide, started taking the threat more seriously. I'm sure every kid got the same speech as I did, warning of the dangers of talking to people that you didn't know. When everyone would discover the truth behind the murders, it would be much more horrible than they expected. If any kid paid attention to their parents' warnings, I wasn't one of them. My mom's words went in one ear and out the other. Since the snow had long melted after Christmas Day, I made plans to meet up with my friends at our hand-built fort in the woods. But when I got there, the only people around were 2 kids I didn't know very well. One was a 7th grader, and the other was a year behind me. He went to the same school as I did, and the rumor was that he had been held back twice. From the looks of him, the rumors were true. Despite only being slightly taller than me, he was already showing signs of a mustache. When it comes to the older kid, I didn't know much about him other than he had a reputation for being mean to younger kids. So the second I saw him, I got very nervous. The 2 of them, whose names I'm not going to mention here for the reason you will soon see, were acting like they were my best friends, despite never talking to me before. When the older boy asked me if my friends were on their way, I foolishly told the truth. If they weren't already at the fort, they probably wouldn't be coming. This must have been the answer they were hoping for, because as soon as I said it, they began their attack. The older boy sucker punched me to the ground, I came very close to passing out. Now I know if I had, I would have been number 3 on their hit list, but somehow I stayed awake. I used a nearby tree to get to my feet just in time to see the younger kid pull a folding knife from his pocket. The older kid was swinging a wooden bat around. When they saw me stand up, the older boy ran up to me and swung for my head. I ducked, but he was close enough to rip a lock of hair out when the bat hit the tree above me. I figured the kid with the knife was coming after me next, so I booked it out of there. My legs were still a little rubbery, but I knew if I stopped, I was dead. The older kid was right on my heels, and my lungs were burning terribly. However, I was fortunate to live on the edge of the woods and made it inside my house before they caught up with me. I ran into my mom, and I breathlessly tried to explain what had just happened. She understood enough to be upset and yelled for my dad to call the police. My mom quickly explained the situation to him, and he relayed it to the dispatcher. The police came quick, and I told them what had happened and who did it. They had no problem finding the boys. They must have known it was over for them, and they both went home and waited. The brutality of the murders was taken into consideration, and it was decided to keep them in custody until their trials. Naturally, the DA wanted to try them as adults, but they were just a bit too young. Since each boy was blaming the other, despite both of them being responsible, they were tried separately. Neither showed any remorse, and as a result they were given life for each murder and 15 to 25 for the attempt on my life. Had this happened just a few years earlier, they both would have likely been given life without parole for each murder charge. But recent legislation states that an offender cannot be given such a sentence if they committed their crime as a youthful offender. Ultimately, the legislation mattered not. Both boys were transferred to the adult system at 21, and because of crimes they committed inside, they probably won't ever get out. And that's the way I like it. It was glaringly obvious to everyone around at the time that they weren't right in the head. It's just terrible that 2 young boys, and almost myself, had to lose their lives before something was done about them. I was just a kid of about 15 or 16 when this happened. This was in the days when just about every kid in school or around the neighborhood had some type of part-time job. It was just a given that once you were old enough to push a lawnmower, shovel a driveway, or rake leaves, you spent a portion of your day working for your own money. As this was decades before the invention of the internet, having a job was something kids just accepted, and some jumped into it with relish. It was a great excuse to get out of the house and make a little pocket money in the process. My first part-time job was typical for that era. I had a newspaper route. That will tell you how long ago it was. I'm in my late 40s now, but can still remember riding my bicycle to the corner to collect the bundle of papers that had been dropped there, counting them out to make sure I hadn't been shorted, insert whatever flyers or ads were included for that day, and pedaling door to door for blocks to deliver them. Right here I can tell you that all of the old movie stuff you see of the kid on his bike zipping merrily down the street, chucking newspapers blindly in the direction of homes as he passes, is complete bullshit. If a kid back then went meandering around the neighborhood flinging newspapers from his bag all willy-nilly, he'd get his ass fired in a hurry. It was kind of a big deal to be a good paper boy. You knew not to ride on the grass, let your bike drop onto anyone's bushes after hopping off, and to keep clear of the flower beds. This was the suburbs, where practically everyone obsessed over how nice their yard looked. So, the better you treated your customers, and their yards, the better the tips were when you collected the money each month. And some, even bigger ones, come Christmas. They even had trophies for the best paperboy in the county. I even won a trophy once. The thing was 2 feet tall, made of fake gold and marble, with a figurine of a paperboy on top, delivery bag and all, holding a rolled newspaper raised to the sky. This shit was taken seriously. Monday through Friday, the papers were delivered in the afternoon. Saturday and Sunday were the only days back then that the newspaper was delivered in the morning. When I figured out that the bundles were usually dropped as early as 5 a.m., that's when I'd get up to start my route. It wasn't that I was gunning for another trophy, it's just that if you got up that early, it'd still be dark by the time you came home. Then, you could just crash back into bed and wake up at your leisure to a free Saturday or Sunday, as you'd never had to get up in the first place. Paperboy logic. This took place on a Sunday. The Sunday papers sucked to the extent that they were the thickest and required the most inserts, including the comic section, which was still called the funnies. So I often had to take 2 trips, leaving half of my bundle by the street post on the corner to deliver the first part for the route and then go back for the rest. It could be a pain in the ass, but it was better than getting a hernia dragging a 2-ton newspaper bag along behind you. The first half of my route was almost entirely apartments. That made for quick deliveries. I could zip into these small 2-story apartment buildings, set the paper down in front of each door, and zip right back out. 8 deliveries in less than a minute. The second half of my route had houses spread out and around the then sparsely developed area. Right in the middle of my route was what we called the horseshoe. It was a dirt road that formed a U-shape, with the upper prongs connecting to the main road. You'd go down the horseshoe on one side to curve around, and go up the other side when on my route. There were only 5 houses spread along the horseshoe, with large gaps between them. There was maybe 1 or 2 streetlights along the way, mostly obscured by the branches of overhanging trees, so it was usually pretty dark. If you didn't know the way by heart, you'd be riding into the grove of trees or roll right into a ditch. That was the main reason that I loved nights with a full moon. The light of the moon shone down on the houses along this dirt road, making it easier to see. Sometimes it wouldn't even seem like it was still nighttime, if the moon was really bright and there wasn't any cloud cover. In the winter, with all the fresh snow everywhere, a full moon meant a very well-lit route. What follows is the one time I wasn't all that crazy about there being a full moon. Dead center of the horseshoe's curve was a single house perched on a small hill. It was a nice 2-story house with flowers running the length of the porch, a bench swing at one end near the front door, a 2-car garage, the works. Ideal suburbia. The only thing about this house was that it had the steepest driveway in the neighborhood. So getting up the darn thing was a chore, even if you had good momentum on your bike starting out. Once to the top of Mount Driveway, I would just roll up the paper, slide it into the mail slot in the side door by the garage, give it a quick tap to send it inside, and then turn around and enjoy a fast glide down the driveway at top speed, even without pedaling. It didn't go quite like that this time, as there was a full moon that night. It was pretty bright, even for 5 in the morning. Lots of houses were painted white or light colors, so they reflected the moonlight well. There was also no wind, which was a huge plus. No worry about the wind yanking the paper out of your hand before you could get it rolled up, and no fighting against the wind either going through your route or coming home. When I rounded the curve at the end of the horseshoe, I was making good time. Even with the Sunday supplement doing its best to weigh me down, I had already delivered the first half of the route, and was looking forward to finishing quick so I could return home to bed. I pedaled up the steep driveway, only having to stop once to push myself along with my sneakers. I dropped the kickstand and dismounted, already digging into my bag for a paper. At the top of the driveway, The whole front of the house practically glowed in the moonlight. Bright white paint, red shutters, all those flowers. It looked kind of pretty. That's when I heard the creak. I stopped, not certain what I had heard. It was definitely metal, like the hinges on a gate being opened. But there were no gates nearby that I knew of, and none of the houses on the horseshoe had fenced-in yards. Then, I heard the creak again, which rose in pitch to a squeak. This time, I recognized the sound immediately. It was the sound of a swing moving. I had been to every playground in town growing up, so I knew the sound that chains make when you use the swing. There was a kid's playground not far from where I was, but I doubted I could hear one of the swings from that distance. Besides, a quick glance confirmed that the playground was deserted, as it would be at 5 in the morning. The moonlight made that view clear. Then I heard the squeak again, lasting a bit longer. The hair stood up on the back of my neck as I realized that the sound was close. I looked back to the house and saw the bench swing at the end of the porch, suspended from 2 chains. It was rocking back and forth. There was no wind to push it, and there would have to be quite a gust to budge something that heavy anyway. Then, the swing picked up speed, as if someone on it was pumping their legs to get it going. My heart started pounding like crazy. There was nobody on the swing. Not a soul. It was empty, and there was no place to hide beneath it where someone could reach up to push it as a prank. The swing was just swinging back and forth on its own. I was completely terrified, but couldn't look away. What the hell was I seeing? There, in the light of the full moon, an empty bench swing was rocking higher and higher, back and forth, with nobody sitting in it. That's when I heard it. A giggle. I heard the giggle of a little girl, perhaps 4 or 5 years old at the oldest. My jaw dropped open, and I was physically shaking. Let me emphasize that there was nothing sinister about this giggle at all. This wasn't a menacing laugh or a piercing cackle. This was the mischievous, tittering giggle of a very young girl at play. It was coming right from the empty bench swing. I couldn't breathe. I had never felt so frightened in my life. Anybody else at that point would have just run, or ridden away on their bike, pedaling as fast as they could go. But no. I was a good paper boy, and I had the trophy to prove it. Acting solely on reflex, for want of another way to explain it, I yanked one of the bulky Sunday papers from my bag and fumbled with it, trying desperately to roll it. I needed to get rid of that damn thing as fast as I could, so I could get out of there. The dead air just above the swing let out what sounded like a short chuckle, as if whatever was laughing had tried to cover its mouth. The swing kept swinging. It was gibbering like some kind of lunatic as I fought with the paper. Fold, damn it, fold! Why won't you fold over? I eventually turned with the half-rolled newspaper to push it through the mail slot. It wouldn't fit. It was way too thick. Why did the damn Sunday papers have to be so huge? I pushed, pulled back, and pushed again, doing little more than shredding the front page with failed attempt after failed attempt. Frantically, I kept glancing back at the swing to see if anyone was there. But there was no one. Just the empty swing, still rocking steadily. I gave up and just rammed the stupid paper into the slot as hard as I could. Squashed into a rumpled mess, half in and half out of the slot, I abandoned the newspaper and scrambled for my bike. I couldn't even get on it. I was shaking so badly and freaking out so much that it was like I had forgotten how to ride a bike. I ran like hell down that steep driveway, dragging the bike behind me by one of the handlebars. Once I reached the dirt road, I finally was able to get onto my bike, but it felt like something had grabbed it, holding it back. I looked down to see the kickstand was still down, digging a thin rut into the dirt beside me. I smashed the thing back with my heel and pedaled for all I was worth. There wasn't another sound of giggling, but the swing rocked a little higher, as if my terror was providing great amusement for whatever sat there. I could still hear the chains on the swing squeak as I took off. At the next house, I didn't give a tinker's damn about paperboy delivery protocol. I just chucked the Fat Sunday edition at the door by their garage and was already zooming off before the thing hit the ground. Same for the next house. And the next one. Just like in the movies, right? I think by the time I completed my route that morning, I may have gone back to delivering the newspapers properly. I don't remember now. I didn't remember then. All I could remember was that empty bench swing and that disembodied giggle. When I got home, I did fall back into bed, but I didn't go to sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and felt readily scared until the sun came up. The following week, it was business as usual. Afternoon deliveries same as normal, and come the weekend, I made sure there were fresh batteries in my Walkman so that I could drown out any unearthly giggling with the songs of Kenny Loggins or Michael Jackson. I never did hear the giggle again, not that I wanted to. The swing only ever rocked when a person was in it, or when we were in the midst of a January blizzard. Even then, it only moved a little under the pounding wind. Like I said, it was heavy. Nothing else creepy or unusual ever happened on my paper route again. Even with what had happened, I realized it could have been worse. I mean, that giggle wasn't followed by any sudden footsteps as an invisible ghost child leapt off the swing to come running after me. That would have made for one hell of a story, but most likely one that ended with me suffering heart failure or winding up in a mental institution. To this day, I have no explanation for that giggle. Some say I was being pranked. Others tell me it was a spirit or a sprite of some kind. All I can tell you is, I know what it's like to be scared by a prank or unnerved by a ghost story. Later in life, I even had a panic attack a few times, so I know what it's like to feel scared. But nothing, ever, has left me as scared as I was that Sunday morning, under the full moon, when I heard that giggle. A few years back, my friends and I decided to see the country. We had grown up around Sacramento area, and as much as we loved our native Cali, we knew damn well that the lower West Coast is hardly a decent representation of the United States. Apparently there's a huge stretch of land between the coasts called America, or at least that's what some would have you believe. But either way, I didn't want to go off to college and into full-time work without having a story or two to tell my dorm mates. So cut to about 3 days into the journey, and we're on our way to our first real stop in Boise, Idaho. My buddy's hooked his iPhone up to the minivan speakers via an auxiliary cable, and is in the process of playing every single road trip related song he can possibly find. It might have been annoying if his music taste wasn't so damn good. Keep your eyes on the road, and your hands upon the wheel. We all roared along with Jim Morrison, Roadhouse Blues blasting so loud I could barely hear the van's engine. It was so much fun. We dreamed up the ultimate road trip, and now we were actually living it. Didn't even need a beer to feel the buzz of it. Just a few miles outside of town, we see someone standing by the side of the road in the distance. It's important to remember the frame of mind we're in, romanticizing the road. I mean, I would never normally stop to pick up a hitchhiker. I've watched way too many horror films. But since there were 4 of us packed into that van, a kind of collective bravado had taken us over. So as we pass the dude and see that he actually has his thumb out, we collectively flip. I stop the van in the middle of the road